Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And I don't know, man. I feel like if y'all are catching this on YouTube, my man must have manifested some really beautiful things for the Northeast, man. So much so, my man is fully rocking the tropical feel. And lo and behold, we have warm weather up in the Northeast. I should be wearing your shirt right about now, brother. I should be wearing your shirt right about now because it's wonderful. It's great to breathe in some nice warm air. Don't know how long this is going to last, but I'm soaking up every inch of it because if anything is going to cozy me up, it's going to be the warmth of this final stretch of games left in the NBA regular season. But I love how you manifested the positivity of the Northeast getting a little bit of that sunshine, baby. I appreciate you.
I'm nothing but a mover of men and goodwill. So, if just
you're a mover of nature as well too. Don't forget that you're a mover of nature.
If I can, send some positive vibes to my Northeastern brethren, then I absolutely will at all times. Coming back from a little brunch, didn't have time to change, so wife had me out in these proverbial streets, celebrating my sister-in-law's birthday. So a little why I'm in the floral patterns here on YouTube. But again, the vibes are always
you're missing
positive.
Is the straw hat, bro. Straw hat and a hammock. That's it.
I wish we're heading for better days. And, it's funny that it's kind of apropos because I think some of the teams we'll be talking about, we'll be heading on vacation to tropical environments very, very soon. The 1, 2, 3 Cancuns are very much on the horizon here for a few teams in the NBA.
Yeah, man, this is going to be a nice, a very interesting episode. We're gearing ourselves up for our annual autopsy reports. So there was a time where, we just sprung death on teams, right? Like actually teams have just sprung death on us. Like they just completely just hit the flat line before we even ready to start talking about them, right? Yeah. But now I feel like it's to a point, and I think people also can appreciate this as well too. We have to lead you into it. You know what I'm saying? We have to kind of give you a little bit of a precursor for you to understand why the autopsy reports are an important fabric to not just the baseline, but also the conversations for some of these teams and their upcoming shortened season. Oh, yes. So this is going to be a very interesting topic of conversation. Shout out to my man Shaw, because we are angling this in a different way to kind of get people geared up for our coveted autopsy, but also to put people on notice about what the expectations may be for a few teams who are not going to be participating in the third act of the NBA season. And with that being said, it gives us a little bit of wiggle room, because whoever it is that's remaining can very much have an impact on how we're looking at the teams that we'll be discussing in this upcoming episode. So precursor autopsy, getting you ready. You know what I'm saying? We're giving people time to get on their Amazon, go get their lab coats, get their stethoscopes. You know what I'm saying? Get their EKG monitors and everything ready to go. You know what I'm saying? Because we're going to be talking about some teams over the next coming weeks, especially with the NBA playoffs coming in. But we got to make sure that we cover these teams as well too. So big conversations to be had. And as always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at the Warren Shaw. Get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. You can go to www.thebaselinenba.com to not only check us, check out this episode, but also all of the episodes that we roll out as part of the Baseline. And then if you're catching us on the YouTube channel, we'd like to say hello to you and yours. And if you see the blue and white logo down at the bottom of the screen, that means we're rocking with the 19 Media Group family. 19 Media Group, we running these content streets. And as always, we encourage everybody to go to www.19mediagroup.com to not only check us, but also the great family of content creators that are a part of the 19 Media Group family. So with that being said, we're going to get ready to discuss some teams that are going, let's say they're going to have early entrances to the autopsy case files. But with that being said, it may also open up an opportunity to discuss what the future could truly look like for some of these teams, even though this upcoming season may not have yielded the results that they wanted. So don't miss out on this upcoming episode of The Baseline. As always, man, we appreciate you and yours. And just to let you know, this episode of The Baseline is brought to you by PrizePicks. Shoot your shot on PrizePicks and get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. PrizePicks is now giving you $50 in lineups when you sign up and play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks makes every dunk, every dime, and every board that much more exciting. So don't miss out on the chance to get started on America's #1 app for sports picks. This basketball season, we're having a blast making these lineups, man. It's super simple and quick. Here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you get them right, you can cash in. I've been checking out the projections on Cade Cunningham, Wemby, and Anthony Edwards lately, and trust me, seeing your takes hit is the chef's kiss. You can also find a community on PrizePicks with new social feed features, and you can share PrizePicks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. You can even follow PrizePicks partners like us, and you can tail or fade your picks with just one click. So what are you waiting for? Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code CLNS to get $50 in your lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. Coming up, Sean and I get down on some precursor autopsy style. Don't miss it here on the Baseline. We're back, Callie Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. So the topic of our conversation is kind of a precursor for us to kind of look into where we'll be heading towards when it's time for us to get into our coveted autopsy reports. There are a number of teams in the East and the West, respectively, that based off of how their season is played out, we know that we are eventually going to make them very much the topic of our autopsy reports, in the early outset. That's a foregone conclusion. But I do think it will bring up an interesting question. And based on how we cover these teams and how we discuss them in our autopsy reports, it leads us to wondering if whether or not these teams will position themselves to be playoff worthy or play-in playoff worthy come next season. Do we see some telltale signs of teams showing you that even though this is a bad season, the outlook for the future may seem a lot brighter than what we might think? And so we have teams that we've looked at, and we've kind of selected out of the East and the Western Conference, and we'll kind of look at it from a percentage perspective. Like, what are their chances on whether or not we think that they actually have a chance to make it in the playoffs? And let's keep in mind too, right, that any of these teams that we're talking about that has that opportunity or has a high chance of probably making the playoffs means that the teams who are making the playoffs might find themselves on the outside looking in come next year. So that means that whatever these teams are doing or currently showing you has to give you strong confidence in feeling like, hey, they're going to be someone you have to take seriously come next year, even though this year has been either a disappointment or have not yielded the results that maybe even the analysts have anticipated. Am I getting that right, Shaw?
Yeah, I'd say so. And, I think to color this more, these are the teams who are currently on, life support, if you will. Like, they're in hospice. We know the day is coming. But at the end of the day, they're going to do what's like common and his with the resurrection, next season. And there are 5 teams pretty much in East Conference that are pretty much out of the playoff contentions right now. And it makes sense to just kind of figure out, hey, who has an opportunity to have an opportunity to move forward, right? Not just be in a perpetual rebuild, but hey, I'm going to actually truly jump out of the grave and get into the dance now when it comes to the play-in conversation next year. And I think there's one team specifically, I think everyone's going to be like, oh, it's crazy, it's got to be them, so forth and so forth. But as we're talking off air, you have some questions about that one team to say, like, I wouldn't rubber stamp them into the playoff conversation next year. And I think this is what makes a great time before we get into the autopsies, where we do a deep dive into each one of these rosters.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it, Shaw. The first team, and then listen, it's the team that glaringly, fresh off of taking the current reigning NBA champions to a 7-game finals this past season, the Indiana Pacers. A team that by and large, losing Tyrese Haliburton, gut-wrenching, no doubt. But we thought that by even with losing Haliburton, and yes, even losing Miles Turner, with the way that the roster was still constructed and the way that Carlisle was able to get them to compete, you would have expected them to at least be somewhere reasonably within striking distance of the Eastern Conference play-in picture. So yeah, even the precipitative drop-off would be so much so that they are like literally among one of the worst teams, not in the Eastern Conference, but in the NBA. And obviously it meant that there was that certain players and the way that the team is constructed and the way that the roster was constructed just did not live up to the level of competitiveness that we're currently seeing now from what the Eastern Conference does look like. And so I think now the question really becomes like, what are the percentages, Shaw? Like, we'll start there. What do you think the percentages are for the Pacers to be a playoff worthy or playoff team come next year?
Yeah, you've convinced me a little bit to have a little bit more pessimism when it comes to the Pacers. I think the notion is just insert Hallie back, the vibes are back, everything is good to go. But there's also the notion of there's other Eastern Conference teams that have made steps up, a la the Toronto Raptors, right? Who we had in the play-in and probably not in the playoff situation. Same thing. We didn't know what to expect from the 76ers. So I don't know that it's going to be add Hallie back and they're just going to be an Eastern Conference contender anymore. There have been significant roster changes. But the one thing here where I think most Pacers are hanging their hat on, and this we'll dive into the autopsy report when we get there, is that by and large, they should have a top 4 pick. So while everyone projecting to be somewhere between 6 and 10 this year, they're actually 14th, 15th. And so as a result, now made a trade that is I think it's top 4 protected. And then I think it's like top 10 or 10 to 14. Like it's a weird situation that they did with the Clippers or whatever. So yeah, I'd give them a better than 50% chance to get into the play-in. But I think going into this season, projecting for next, we would have said, oh, they'll be in the playoffs, no doubt. And that probably would have been more of a 75 to 80% chance. But I think I'm a little bit more dubious now after our conversation, and I'm going to give them a 50% chance to at least get back to the play-in next year.
Yeah, I like where you're going with it, because if we say maybe play-in versus playoffs, right, you got to get through the play-in to actually make the playoffs. And the way that the Indiana Pacers, to me, have looked, and again, they are among one of the worst teams in the NBA. They are the worst team in the Eastern Conference. It's hard to imagine that Tyrese Haliburton is going to suddenly elevate this team in such a level, to such a degree, that we realistically see them catapulting themselves somewhere from, where they are to 10, because of the way other teams have kind of been constructed, right? Like the Charlotte Hornets, they're not going anywhere. And I think they have they've figured it out, right? At the very least, we will be talking about the Charlotte Hornets more confidently, which we haven't been able to do the last few years. The Atlanta Hawks, while they've gotten rid of Trae Young, they still managed to have a good young core. They're going to be around, right? So it's interesting when we talk about the Indiana Pacers, that it's not just about Tyrese Haliburton. And it's what I had said to you before, we decided, we got jumped on here recording this, that I was like, the big caveat to this, Shaw, is where we should be or where we are with Pascal Siakam. And I'm not trying to make Pascal Siakam, trying to, compare him to Jaylen Brown, but I am using the comparison of the opportunities that, say, a Jaylen Brown was given, with what happened with the Boston Celtics and what happened with the Indiana Pacers, and his opportunity with what he could have done with the Pacers. And to me, Pascal Siakam is kind of more proven to me that he is a complementary player. He needs an alpha player. He needs a Tyrese Haliburton to play at the level that I thought he should have been able to play at, knowing that Haliburton wasn't going to be on this roster. It's just, that's just kind of how it is sometimes, man. And it's okay. But you don't have the roster that you had a couple of years ago. And the roster that was constructed took a couple of years to get themselves to this point, to see themselves playing in the NBA Finals. And it wasn't just Tyrese Haliburton. You no longer have Benedict Mathurin, right? You no longer have Miles Turner. So now you got a lot of other guys that, if Pascal has not been able to elevate these guys to a certain level, to play at a certain level and compete at a certain level, knowing that you have to wait for Haliburton to come back to help put you in that space tells me that Haliburton now has to elevate Siakam. And there's still going to have to be moves that Pritchard is going to have to make in order for this roster to be competitive in what has now been a more closely knit, tightly race-like kind of Eastern Conference. And I'm just not seeing that yet. And so that's the reason why I got them somewhere in the 30-40% range of making the playoffs. And it's not because I don't think that the players are capable. It's just Haliburton, a year removed from this injury, he ain't like Jason Tatum. And I'd be interesting to see what version of Haliburton is going to be needed for that type of Pacers team to even be playing worthy with the way that we see the Eastern Conference constructed.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, right? And he'll be back next year, and then how long does it take him to ramp up, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Zoo is a big acquisition that they made, and I expect him to play well. Even if he's not going to play the rest of this year, he's going to play well next year, be a rebounding and defensive presence there. Not the spacer that Turner in theory was supposed to be and was. But your points about Siakam are very well heard. And I think, again, the Eastern Conference is a little better than I think many of us gave credit for going into the season. We like to throw dirt on the Eastern Conference and say they're the leastern and all that other stuff. But, there's a lot of teams with competitive pride in here. And the Pacers are not going to be one of those teams who don't have pride. And Haliburton is very much a prideful individual because he's been called underrated and, overrated rather, in all those other things. I am worried about, like I said before, just, hey, add him back and the vibes will be there. Last year's Pacers team was very vibesy. And that's not to say that they didn't execute, but there was a part of things like this. Like, it was just like a coming to Jesus kind of moment, like everything aligned for them to be really, really successful, in their run. And I'm just, I don't think you can just assume it's going to be that same way, especially with the parts that are moved around them on the team and the rest of the volatility in the Eastern Conference as well.
Absolutely. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. All right, Shaw. So I mean, look, and I'm not trying to talk you out of your level of confidence of the Indiana Pacers. I'm just a little hesitant on that aspect of it, and maybe because of the next teams that I think we're going to probably get into. Listen, the Brooklyn Nets, right? What do we make of the chances for the Brooklyn Nets in their ability to possibly be a play-in and playoff team?
Yeah, I have zero confidence here. And, they can have all the draft picks and they can have all the guards. They can retain Michael Porter Jr. I think they are still at least a year away from being serious in this. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, not because I have disrespect for them, but we'll autopsy them appropriately. But I don't think there's anything that's signaling to me that they are going to be competitive, next year. So I won't be disrespectful. I'll give them a 5% chance of getting into the play-in, and then I will send them a 0% chance of actually getting into the playoffs. I'm sorry, I can't see it.
So do you find? Well, we still have a couple more teams there, I guess, to discuss in that. You find that they have the worst chances of being play-in worthy of the teams that we'll be discussing. That is what you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
I don't. While MPJ has been good for them, you just don't know if that's the piece that they're going to ultimately retain. And it seems like they're wanting to cash in on some of these draft picks and trying to evaluate that talent. So I think everybody else here that will listen, especially in the Eastern Conference, has a true centerpiece that they're at least trying to hold on to some degree. And I think more of an accelerated plan with more developed players. I think Brooklyn's going to be extremely young, and MPJ is not a guy who can lead this roster. And this is not a knock. He can't lead them into the playoffs, as like the number one guy. Like, I just don't think he has that lift in him.
I think that's the reason why the draft is going to be so critical for the Brooklyn Nets. Listen, do I think that MPJ was a solid play in the Brooklyn Nets part? Because maybe the idea was, hey, he's going to play out, go crazy, throw up a ton of shots, and then probably find another destination of someone paying him a lot of money. I think if MPJ was intelligent enough, he'd continue to do what he's doing. He's averaging, 24 points per game, right? So clearly his scoring prowess is there. There's accessibility for him to be a top level scorer, and there's nobody else. I mean, the only other person that would have been in the same ballpark would have been Cam Thomas. He's no longer there. So I think Cam Thomas you have a bona fide scorer, right? If Jordy Fernandez has the kind of system that is pliable for him to continue to do what he does, but yet he has an impact on those young players, I think the key comes down to, what did they get in a draft? Do you get yourself a ball leader, somebody who can get everyone else theirs and still get his? This could be the draft to do it. But I agree with you. I don't know if whether or not even that is going to elevate them over the other teams that we'll be talking about, and the percentages of whether or not they are playoff or play-in worthy. Definitely not playoff worthy, but play-in worthy. I'm going to give it a 20% chance, Shaw, because I think when you have bona fide scores, like a guy like MPJ, and you use this offseason to make one or two good moves, right moves for what you're going all in on, you may actually close the gap a little bit. And I think I might be speaking about more of it on what the other teams may not do enough, that it might wind up having us speak more to how that bottom tier of teams, it's going to be a much closer race come next year for those that might want to be playing, eyeing their eyes on the prize, which is try to, at least be within striking distance of the play-in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Brooklyn will have improvement, in theory, in terms of wins per total. I just think the rest of the East is also gunning in the same or trending in the same direction. So there may not be teams that are in the teens in terms of wins next year. I think the East will be more competitive, but I don't think that spells the Brooklyn Nets ascending into a top 10, situation. I still think they'll be 12, 13, but they may have 25 wins, right? And which will be market improvement, I think, for where they're trending for this year.
Absolutely. All right. So now let's talk the next team, which would be the Washington Wizards. If you have the Nets have no chance. And listen, Trae Young and Anthony Davis, been kind of talking. They're like, hey, I think, we're going to surprise some people. I think people should pay attention to what we're going to do come next year and everything like that. They're trying to hype up the wizardry. Saying they trying to hype up the cauldron. What do we think about the Washington Wizards play-in playoff chances?
Yeah, I'm going to give Washington a 62% chance to get into the play-in, and I'll give them about a 40% chance to get into the playoffs. And this is always health dependent. AD goes down, suffers whatever AD goes through every single year, misses 25, 30 games, and then those chances and those percentages drop precipitously. But I do believe with a healthy and the proper plan, I think, for both of them at this stage, coupled along with Keyshawn George, who showed a lot of promise this year, the continued play of Alex Sarr, at that center position, Koulibaly as well, another year of Johnson on the perimeter. I feel like they're showing the bones, and whatever they get potentially in this year's draft, I think this is a Washington team that really could make some noise and be problematic. I don't think they'll be fun to play, and they could have almost like a Charlotte-like scenario where they maybe start off a little rough and they're trying to load manage, et cetera, et cetera. Then all of a sudden it starts to click in, and then they become like this juggernaut, kind of offensively, and AD kind of manning the middle. Again, if healthy, that could be really interesting in the Eastern Conference. They're probably the most intriguing team to me of the many teams that we're going to talk about here today.
I still don't know about what to expect from Brian Keefe, as a head coach. He could easily be he could be a Jordan Knott or he could be a Jordy Fernandez, right? So I don't know. I will say you can't mess this up if you got two premier players like Young and Davis. So with that being said, I actually have the Washington Wizards. I'm giving them a 50% chance of making the play-in, but I'm giving them a 10% chance of making the playoffs. Here's the thing. Even if they got to the play-in, I don't know if that team is strong enough to knock a team out to get into the playoffs, right? And their win totals, I don't think, are going to be positioning them to be able to be among one of the top teams that's going to get a spot in the playoffs. I still think you have to contend with the Magic, you have to contend with the Heat, and you're going to have to contend with the Hawks. I don't see 4 teams out of the Southeast making it,
sure,
right? That would mean that a team would have to take a serious step back. I am not there yet. I think we've tried killing off the Miami Heat how many times now? And I'm a lot more confident about the Atlanta Hawks and what they have on their roster because they are deeper and they don't have to worry about the health problems like I still worry about with the Washington Wizards. So if you're going to convince me more on the play-in aspect of it, all right, because it's hard not to imagine a play-in scenario that Young and Davis doesn't impact. But to your point, that health thing is that weighs so heavily on my 50%, bro. Like any situation in which Young or Davis are going to be out for 10 or more games, that's a wrap. It's a wrap. Like we have to have a talk-ish or abandon ship episode to give myself a chance, to abandon ship on that. Because I'll be ready to jump. I'm ready to jump on that real quick because of that health thing with these guys, man. It drives me nuts, specifically for Davis, because that's what we're hinging this on.
Yeah, it makes you very queasy and uneasy. So I think you definitely need to have the emergency break glass, parachute, all the escape hatches, everything ready, on any takes with the Washington Wizards, especially with ADs involved.
Absolutely. All right. Chicago Bulls. I like this one, Shaw, because this is a team that just, they never, what is it? Never, no retreat, no surrender, right? They are the Pittsburgh Steelers. See, NFL, gotcha. They are the Pittsburgh Steelers of the NBA, right? They just they can't be bad enough to get into the lottery.
But
they can't be bad enough to get into the lottery, and they have to be good enough to refuse, you know what I'm saying, to never be good enough to beat the other teams. That's just the way things are. And I don't blame them. There's a lot of pride in history. And if you got Billy Donovan as your head coach, that's what you got to contend with. So what are we giving their chances for next year? Play in and playoff.
Yeah, I'm going to give them a 25% chance for the play in and a 10% chance of the playoffs. Their annual pilgrimage.
We're fine. We're fine. I mean, we're gonna body them up twice.
Yeah, I mean, their annual pilgrimage seems to be coming to an end here, and I think, as you've been alluding to, the rest of the East has done enough, I think, in essence, to kind of push the Bulls back down into place, despite their own best efforts. And now that they've cut bait on the Vucevic's and the Levines and DeRozan and all of that stuff, even Kobe White, I think now they're just like, all right, we're settling in here for what should be a rebuild. And I think that's okay. Like, I think that's all right. So with everybody else still just right there, and because Charlotte is taking the proverbial leap, Washington we talked about, Indiana we talked about as well too. These are all teams that are below them right now that presumably should be better than them next year. So I can't see how Chicago gets back into the play-in, let alone the playoffs.
I think the biggest question is going to be whether or not Carson Novus is going to continue to ride with Billy Donovan. And I'm saying this not to be disrespectful to Billy Donovan. I think, listen, we felt the same way about what the Utah Jazz what they eventually did with Quinn Snyder, right? Quinn Snyder got the Jazz to a certain point, and we'll be talking about them in a little bit. And he needed to be in a new situation, a new space. And the Jazz obviously had different plans, right? That just didn't align with where Snyder was as a head coach and what he was doing with the roster that was constructed. And I think we're at that tipping point. Whatever the Chicago Bulls decides to do at this point is going to have to be either a reflection of Billy Donovan's future, right? Of the kind of team he's coaching, or it has to be without Billy Donovan being a part of that future. Because I feel like there is going to be a clash. You know what I mean? I don't know where they are with him and how he coaches young talent, but he's had his opportunities with young talent and he's had his opportunities with veteran guys. And it may just be the type of fit of the players that the Bulls are getting with the type of coaching style that Billy Donovan exhibits. And I'm not saying that he isn't one to adjust and he doesn't. It's not about that. It's just that sometimes the management and the coach, they are not, symbiotic. And, then all of a sudden you got venom and carnage. Okay. So here, my thing is they need to settle that part out first. And I think that will give us a clearer picture about what's going to happen for the Chicago Bulls. But I agree with you, because now you have gutted the old roster, right? With what you do have. I don't know if next year is a good enough telltale sign that they're going to be doing what they did this year. They'll get to about 30 wins this year. I don't even know I think you'll maybe cut that by 10, given what's going to happen for these guys next year. And I don't know how much longer you can continue to do that with Billy Donovan. I don't think Billy Donovan deserves that. So I'm going to give the percentage. I'm going to give about 20% play-in and 5% playoffs.
Yeah, well, I mean, nice round numbers there. Donovan did sign an extension this offseason, or last offseason, I guess, in the summer, in July 25. So he seems to be their guy. But I don't know if he knew that they were going to be shipping, off these parts here, which again is time. But right, is the general managership and the coach in lockstep and in alignment with how the future of this roster is? Does he want to be there for a rebuild? And those are questions we don't know right now. So stay tuned for the Chicago Bulls autopsy, because I think it could be juicy.
It could be juicy. All right, Shaw, finally, let's talk about a team that, it's an interesting one, because I think the offseason is going to weigh very heavily on what they do, what they do with a certain player on this roster, and whether or not it's going to be enough, right? So we're talking about the Milwaukee Bucks. Yeah, I mean, listen, the elephant in the room is Giannis, right?
Yeah.
if Giannis is committed to this team, I'd have a hard time not putting the Milwaukee Bucks in a position to be at least play-in worthy and possibly, playoff worthy. But something's going to have to change for that in that dynamic. So I'm curious on where you see this with the Milwaukee Bucks.
No, I mean, I'll keep it short. I think 72% chance they're in the play-in, 55% chance they're in the playoff. Giannis dependent. Giannis gets traded, I'm Thelma and Louising off of that immediately. That is done. I would. There's no chance. So for me, Giannis is one of the top 5 players in the NBA, proverbial MVP candidate, presuming health as well too. If he can get to 65, 70 games next year, this is a team that should easily be in contention for the play-in and should, be right there for the playoffs as well too. Even if it's me and you running around out there, like he has that level of talent, to bring the kind of raise the talent of the rest of his players, especially in the Eastern Conference. But again, if he's moved in the offseason, that stuff all starts flying around again, then this Bucks team is cooked.
Yeah. The only caveat to this point, Shaw, I like your percentages. I'll roll with you on those percentages. But I'm going to tell you this. This is my caveat to this, and this is a big caveat. If you keep Giannis, you can't keep Rivers. I don't care what Giannis wants to say. I don't care what the management wants to say. This Bucks team, I think they need something fresher, right? They need something fresher, and it has to come from a different space of where you want, because to me, that's the only way you're going to keep Giannis, Like Giannis is the kind of player that while there's loyalty and commitment to things, he is not going to be opposed to working with someone who sees him in a different way and shows him and he buys into it. I don't know if whether or not Doc Rivers is that person to continue to show him that and for Giannis to buy into that. This has now been 3 years of this. You see what I'm saying? So if the focal point is Rivers not coaching up the rest of the roster to play at the level that a Giannis gives you, right? And I'm not talking about scoring the basketball. I'm saying all of the other intangibles to make them a competitive basketball team. If he is not inciting and bringing out the Ubuntu on the rest of the roster, right, then what purpose does Doc Rivers truly serve, given the storied situation that brought him to this space to begin with? So my whole thing is it's going to come down to Rivers or Giannis, but you can't have both. I think if you have both, I'm going to be more confident about the play-in, but I don't have as much confidence about the playoffs. But if it's about Giannis and you have a head coach that's innovative and really knows what they have with Giannis and builds up the rest of that roster, I have more confidence that they can not just make the play-in, but also make the playoffs as well, too.
Well, Rivers is in the news thanks to Stephen A. Smith, and Stephen A. is saying that Doc is going to retire this year, and Doc is like, I'm not answering those questions, or is kind of debunking that. And he shouldn't be answering those questions now.
Right.
Like, got to focus on whatever the rest of this remainder of the season is anyway. But I think that's something that we'll dive into autopsy time whenever that ultimately comes for the Milwaukee Bucks, as they still have a bunch of chance to get into the play-in this year. But we will see. I'm dubious on that at best.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, Sean, I dig into the Western Conference teams that we think are going to maybe have a chance to play in and play off for 2027. Sounds good, man. Sounds good. I like it. Don't go anywhere.
You've earned this. Now it's time to embark on your own personal adventure. Book your vacation with Exquisite Traveling Tours today. Explore the world and discover yourself.
We're back, Callie, Warren, Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. Time for us to shift our attention to the Western Conference team, Shaw. And that was a good conversation that we had about the Eastern Conference teams. It tells us that, the East is slowly but surely closing the gap. Because we would spend a majority of our time talking about Western Conference teams, and we were so talking about the Eastern Conference teams. And I like that. It means that while, the management, the executives are playing their part, they're doing their part, and they're putting together interesting rosters, and they're making interesting moves, and it's giving us a little bit more of a competitive feel for what we can expect come next year. And that's all that we ask for, because a lot of the teams that have been considered the worst teams in the NBA have been more the Eastern Conference teams than it has been the Western Conference team. But with that being said, there are always one or two teams that have, don't disappoint. And I actually want to start from the bottom up. I know that you had started indicating in our notes, you started with the Grizzlies, but one team that doesn't disappoint is the Sacramento Kings, right? I want to start with them and then work our way back up. So, Shaw, what do we think about the Sacramento Kings and their chances of making the play-in and chances of making the playoffs for next year?
Yeah, this is bad. This is slim pickings here for Sac, though. I'm gonna just flat out say I don't think they have any chance of making the playoffs next year, and I would give them a 22% chance of getting to the play-in, and I think that's even being generous. While they should get a significant pick, what they're doing with this veteran team, veteran pieces that don't ultimately match, front office has a lot to do in essence to clean things up. Are they going to get off Levine? Are they going to get off DeRozan? What about Westbrook? What about the bonus? It just doesn't fit. So while they have some promising young guys and Renard and Nick Clifford and guys like that, I mean, hey, solid players. Your boy Keegan Murray still what's really good there. I'm not really sure.
He's still there? He's still alive?
Hurt again.
My goodness.
Hurt again. So he's had a rough season. So I should say hurt again. This season he's been habitually hurt. This is just not a team that I have a lot of faith in, and it's not out of disrespect. I mean, what have they shown us here? So Sacramento, like I said, no chance to get into the playoffs, and maybe, like I said, a 22% chance to get into the play-in, and that's a lot of things have to break right for them, including the breaking of other players above them.
We're still looking for that kingly character in Sacramento. That's all. I mean, that's all there is to it. It's just interesting. Do you know what the Sacramento Kings are to, like, Shaw? Like, do you have a sense or an idea of their identity? I don't.
Well, no. I think Doug Christie has tried to, at one point, he tried to be defense. Then he was like, hey, I don't have those types of guys. So let me lean into the offense and let me realize I don't have efficient guys. So let me just play a bunch of players out there. And then, that's what led to Keon Ellis not really falling out of the coach's rotation, whatever doghouse Keon Ellis fell into. They ultimately trade him. Forgot, even as I mentioned that, DeAndre Hunter's going to come back for this team. It just doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So like you said, there's no direction.
There's no direction. I'm not blaming, Doug Christie. But I just don't think that he fell into an ideal situation. And sometimes I think even as coaches, you try to work with the hand that's dealt, but you also have to think about too, that when you take on this role, this is going to have an impact about what the perception is as you being a head coach for other organizations. If you're entertaining the idea about wanting to be a head coach, if this doesn't work out, right? And so that just tells me that management and Christie are just not on the same page. And then the other thing as well too is I'm not seeing Christie's imprint on the younger players, competing. And if everything is relying on the veteran players, well, you knew what you were getting yourself into when you brought these players over. You see what I'm saying? It isn't as if these guys did not come with some level of baggage, with the exception of DeMar DeRozan, who I think has been the ultimate professional. But at the same time, he's always been the kind of guy where he's never had to be the leader. He's been next to leaders, and his play has always exhibited that leadership level. He doesn't have that vocal leader that he rides next to elevate and play it a certain way, like he used to when he was playing next to Lowry or when he was playing next to Vucevic. And those were those teams that he played on that were very competitive, even if they fell short, even in San Antonio. So yeah, it's unfortunate because nothing is giving us any reason to feel like that's going to change come next year. Even if they get access to a draft pick, none of that is going to change. And I think that's just the part that's going to be unfortunate. So I agree with you. I virtually have them no chance of making the play-in and virtually no chance of them making the playoffs. I think at the very best, you have them in the double digits. I think like 10 or 10.
I'm trying to be.
You're trying to be generous. Yeah. It's hard to see that because unless something miraculously happens between now and when we get to the off season, legit like free agency and after the draft where we see what it is that they do, I have them in the single digits. Maybe I can change that when we get further into July, August, or whatever the case may be. But I have that in the single digits, period, full stop. All right, let's transition ourselves to the Utah Jazz. And I think you like talking about this because I believe that you feel like people may not recognize they got something going on over there. And we may get to see a little bit of it, you know what I'm saying, when the 2026 season starts.
Yeah, Utah, I think, is a team that is going to not really surprise people because I think some people see them coming. But right now, we know Walker Kessler's been out for the majority part of the year, but we'll be back. Marketing out, we'll be back. Obviously, they've got decent guys in Filipowski rather. Keontae George took a major leap this year. Ace Bailey now is starting to get in there. He started off the season very, very slow, and they're going to have a draft pick in addition to Jaren Jackson Jr. Coming back as well. And Will Hardy's a good coach. Like, they've shut players down. They've gave up games because Hardy's too good of a coach. Like, this is what's permeating around the league. Is like, well, yeah, despite the team, despite even some of the guys maybe not living up to all the potential, his schemes do well. And so if you combine that with what is an emerging roster in terms of his talent, I think this is going to be a team that's going to have a massive, I say, Pistons-like leap from when the Pistons were in the doldrums, if you will, to all of a sudden like, oh, snap, this team has won 40-something games. Like, Utah has that capability because of Will Hardy's kind of musings, but also the roster that Danny Ainge and I guess his son as well, too, have kind of put around this, in addition to whatever draft pick they get this summer.
I love what you said, Shaw, and I'm going to agree with you. Let me put it to you like this. If you want to use the Piston analogy, so to speak, as the litmus test, what was the one thing that was suffering for the Detroit Pistons before this turnaround? Is their inability to play defense, their inability to stop the other team in critical situations, and they wind up losing games that they ultimately either had control of, got out ahead of. They just didn't know how to close the deal. They didn't know how to win games. And sometimes it's not a question of the talent. It's a question of the cohesiveness and the buy-in. And to your point, Will Hardy has already set the tone. It's funny how we're talking about a team that is top 10 offense, but is the worst team defensively, right? It would be something if we said each and every single one of those guys can't play defense. We don't know because they haven't been healthy enough to stay on the court together to play cohesive defense. You know what I'm saying? It's all like Will Hardy has been basically, playing with, a roster aligner, for most of the season because of the in and out that goes on, whether it's Kessler, whether it's Markkanen, Filipowski, all of these guys. Like, he's been juggling the rosters to put what can be effectively the best competitive team. That means something is going to get compromised. So while the team looks like they can get their buckets almost whenever at will in his system, the one thing now he can focus on, if everyone is healthy, is how to play collectively solid defense. They ain't got to be like the Detroit Pistons, right? Because some of those guys came in being defensive-minded guys, but they can play better defense collectively and can be competitive in the final stretch run of certain games that they have not been able to win. They can position themselves to do it if they just get a season under their belt and actually work on that aspect of it, which I think they'll have a chance to do this offseason. And that will certainly elevate them to a team where I'm going to say 55% play-in and maybe 50% playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm going to go maybe 62% play-in and probably say 52% playoff. I think, maybe the lights get too bright, so to speak, but I think the defense is going to take a major step up next year with Jaren Jackson and Kessler back. Again, all this is always going to be health dependent. Both of those guys have long injury histories as well. CBS receipt long in terms of how many nicks and knacks they have. But if they can stay healthy, I think this is a team that's poised to make a big, big leap in addition, again, to whatever draft pick they get. Senza Ball as well, too, coming off the bench has been a nice addition to them, a good shooter, gives them a lot of, versatility on the perimeter. Kevin Love, whether he returns or not as a veteran, just to kind of like be in the locker room and be that. And Keontae George taking another proverbial leap. Isaiah Collar playing really well. Like, they have a lot of guys here that I think, the West is going to be in for a little bit of a rude awakening in Salt Lake City next year.
I like what you said real quick, Shaw, about Senza Ball. To me, what I've noticed is the key for teams that were arguably, atrocious, have catapulted themselves to be legitimate contending teams or teams that have positioned themselves to be, dangerous teams you don't want to mess with. Boston Celtics, Detroit Pistons. The key is having role players or core guys that they didn't have to go and spend a ton of money, free agency wise. They got them through the draft. They built them up. They kept them relatively on the cheap. And then just as they were getting towards maybe the final 2 years of their deal, they come in and they ball out, and you're getting them at the height of where everything is starting to come together. And even if you decide that you got to go out and get a guy, you can do it through the buyout, or you can position yourself to move that guy and get additional pieces if you realize now that the rest of the roster is rounding itself out. But it's extending the depth of your roster that becomes very important. And it starts with having a guy who goes out there and gets you buckets off the bench. When you need him to come and do something, he'll give it to you, whether it's start or come off the bench. And Sensabaugh has been that guy through the trials and tribulations that the Jazz have suffered. He's been that guy. And I like where you were going with that point. Let's transition, Sean, and talk about the New Orleans Pelicans. I can't believe I might be saying this, but should we feel confident about the Pelicans for 2026-27? Can they be a team that might be able to slack a couple of teams in the back of the head and remind them, you know what I'm saying? Ain't nothing spicier than playing against the New Orleans Pelicans.
Well, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, as I often do. And people have been saying, have you realized like Zion's on track to play his most amount of games, since whatever season, like I think his second season. And it's like he played X amount of games in a row and so forth. And this is more like, if a tree falls in the woods type of situation. It's like, does anybody care? Does anybody even know what's happening in New Orleans right now? This is the roster that consisted, like you look at it, it's like, oh, it's got some guys. Oh, that should work. And it just doesn't. It just doesn't. If Joe D and company do not take, the hatchet to this roster and start selling off parts, then something is fundamentally wrong. And while that's more probably in line for where the autopsy is, for the purposes of this conversation, I can't believe, I can't put any faith in their ability to make a significant run from where they currently are. So talent-wise, fine. I look at the talent and say, I have to at least say, you have a 40% chance to make the play-in, but I don't think this team is making the playoffs. Something fundamentally has to change here. That might mean a Zion trade. That might mean Trey Murphy or Herb Jones or whoever, DeJounte Murray at some point. But it just doesn't work, my guy. So I'm giving them 40% for the play-in, which I think is extremely generous given what they've shown us. But they have talent, and I'm going to give them like a 25% chance to make the playoff.
You like how I tried hyping them up like in the beginning? You almost made it sound like, I almost made it sound like I'm going to be the one to speak about how
you tried it.
Yeah, exactly. I have no confidence in them making the playoffs or the play-in come next year. And I will say this, Shaw. It's great that everyone's talking about where Zion is trending, which is exactly why if you're Joe Dumars, you sell high.
Sell high.
You sell high to high. You know what I'm saying? Like, the highest are high. You know what I'm saying? It's like just Selassie high. You sell as high as it can go. You know what I'm saying? With Zion, and get as much as you can. You know what I mean? But part of that problem is you move on from Willie Green. You have James Borrego. James Borrego, to me, has done nothing different than what I saw was happening with Willie Green. So, even if it was a question of he doesn't have the pulse of the locker room, I don't see where James Borrego has the pulse of the locker room either. Because you can make the argument from a talent perspective, while they're not like the Charlotte Hornets, you had some talented pieces that you could have worked with that could have basically competed. So you're saying that the Western Conference is so dynamically different that the Pelicans never had a shot in hell without having Zion Williamson on that basketball court. Now, even if you do have Zion Williamson, I am not speaking about Trey Murphy the same way. I'm not speaking about the rest of that roster the same way, which tells me that Borrego has not had his imprint on this roster and this team. So, yeah, Joe Dumars has got a lot of work ahead of him. And even if they do or don't do something with Zion Williamson, I don't know if having him and Borrego together is going to make things work for the New Orleans Pelicans, given the way things are already in the Western Conference. So, yeah, I have very little confidence that they're making the play-in come next year, which obviously means I have no confidence that they will make the playoffs next year.
No argument for me, man. They've shown you nothing to give you any confidence.
All right, let's go ahead and focus our attention on the Dallas Mavericks, Cooper Flagg and team. All right. So Kyrie Irving gave the deuces about this season. I don't know what that means come next season. It seems like, he was given the deuces and cryptic message. This probably is my last game I play as a Dallas Maverick, which I don't know is the worst thing in the world, but it does speak to what are we talking about now for the Dallas Mavericks for next season? How much confidence do we have that they can either make the play-in or the playoffs?
Yeah, this is the hardest of the teams for me to evaluate because of the Cooper Flagg factor, also the Kyrie issue as well. Where they land in the draft, I think, is going to be immense. And do they decide that they want to try to accelerate the timeline, or do they want to build slow? So they can go in two directions with this. I think Flagg is somebody who's going to peg as super competitive and not going to be long for a rebuild of some sort, 2-3 years even. I just don't think he'll have the patience for it. So then you piss off another superstar. No, I don't. I think he's played winning basketball at every level. And while the NBA is obviously very, very different from anywhere he's been, I think he's going to be like, listen, build a winner around me. I don't think he's a diva and he's going to go into the office and complain. But that frustration, I think you'll see that there. And I think they know, and they kind of owe it to their fans after the Luka debacle as well. So if they toil around and don't produce a winner, I just don't know how well that will go. But with the current roster as constructed, how fast can they get there? And I don't know if Kyrie's a part of the equation in terms of playing or part of the equation in terms of getting parts that will make that timeline go faster. So it puts me in a weird situation. So I'm going to hedge and say I'm going to give them a 45% chance to make the play in, about a 35% chance to make the play off. I think they're going to continue to be competitive. Cooper Flagg is going to be awesome next year. He's already awesome now. And he'll take another leap and they'll be like right there. And, and I think even right now, they are the league leader, I think, in clutch games played, also in clutch games lost. But they are consistently in games for whatever reason with whatever mixed match of this roster. And they lost Eric Lively forever ago. And they traded Anthony Davis forever ago now, too. So all this they do off the strength of Cooper Flagg and, the coaching of Jason Kidd to a lesser degree as well. So, yeah, I think they're going to be right there, but I'm not going to give them a better than 50% chance of making the play in because I just don't have a great idea of where the roster is trending this summer.
I'm going to give them a 55-60% chance to make the play in, and I'll give them a 45% chance to make the playoffs. Because I think with Cooper Flagg, unless you have Kyrie Irving on your roster, or if you decide to go in a different direction and you pair him up with another quality player, depending on who that quality player is the type of player that the Mavericks be a good enough team that'll catapult themselves, 2-3 games, in a play-in tourney to get themselves into the playoffs. I don't know if I can buy into that. I will agree with you in the sense that the roster does need to be definitely needs to be tweaked. But I also see something in Cooper Flagg that I don't think I'm seeing from the other players and teams that we've been just talking about. Cooper Flagg to me is a kind of player, kind of a Wemby-like. I think he's commanding the elevated play of his teammates. And I think they are recognizing that as well too. And as long as the management or the executives that be don't mess around and start moving players prematurely from seeing what they can do together collectively. And I'm talking about the core guys, Max Christie, Najee Marshall, those kind of guys. I see them getting better next to Cooper Flagg. I feel like Gafford and PJ Washington are expendable. Klay Thompson, expendable. You could probably turn around and use younger players and position yourselves a little bit better. I'm not saying that they're not good and they can't be good players. They could just be good players elsewhere. If for the Dallas Mavericks as a team to compete under the Jason Kidd system, they're going to have to retweak that roster somewhat because I see way too many inconsistencies from those guys. I think Kidd got what he could get out of them, getting them to the finals with the roster that he had when it was Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. It's not the same dynamic. So it just really is going to come down to how you construct that roster, but you have to make sure that the players that you're moving are not players that Cooper Flagg has invested his energy and his gameplay and his leadership qualities to for the sake of saying you're doing it and there's no rhyme or reason to why you're doing it. I think that to me is where the turnoff comes in play and ticking off a guy like Cooper Flagg, who that's not what you want to do if you expect him to help carry you or help move your team in a position to be competing in the playoffs.
Well, I'll say this. With Kyrie on the roster right now, clearly those are the top two guys. If you trade Kyrie, you don't know what you're getting. Maybe it's draft equity. Maybe it's another player. I don't know. But then I would ask you, who's the second best player if Kyrie's gone? Who's the third best player right now? And I don't think they're even that. Like that definitely oscillates game to game, right? Najee Marshall, I guess, lively when he's healthy. Is a veteran Klay Thompson. They're going to put a lot into and Ryan Nembhard as well. But to me, that's where it's like there's just not somebody. He doesn't have a running mate with Kyrie's not there. And that's what makes me nervous about what they're going to ultimately try to do and how fast they'll be able to do it.
Yeah. It'll be very, very interesting. All right, Shaw. So finally, let's focus our attention on the last team here, that being the Memphis Grizzlies. So what do we make of the Memphis Grizzlies, Shaw? Like, as far as, is that a team that we are buying into the idea that they can make the play-in and possibly the playoffs?
Yeah, no, thank you. Listen, whatever they decide to do with Ja, that's obviously the biggest question going into the offseason. So
they're just making it too difficult for us to want us to make it easy to say it.
Yeah, I just there's not vibes here for me in any way, shape, or form. Like it's all weird. And they've completely abandoned the path that they were on. Zach Edey probably will not be back this year. So as we head into next year, like, all right, is he going to be a focal point? And if so, is that the focal point you ultimately want? Can you really build around Zach Edey? And, ultimately what you do in the draft? They have a lot of, like, intriguing young players, but none of them project as, I'd say, even all-stars. Even if you talk about, Cedric and you talk about Jalen Wells, and he's actually taken a step back this year, from my lens. Ty Jerome and Scottie Pippen Jr., Walter Clayton, all these guys are nice guys, but not something, you're like, oh my God, I'm so excited, to build around that. So if Ja ultimately gets on the move, I think that's going to plummet their overall chances, because that will clearly send, hey, we are truly, truly rebuilding. But even if he stays, I wouldn't give this team more than a 35% chance to get into the play-in. And then I'd say maybe an 18% chance to get into the playoffs. And that might be generous as well too. I'm actually going to drop that. I'm giving them a 12% chance to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I give them a 5% chance of making the playoffs, and I give them a 20% chance of making the play-in. Ja is not the one-man band person that he was when he first came into the league that triggered forming that Grizzlies squad that we had seen over that 3-year stint. And it's not a question of overachieving. I just think he was just in a good space. They somehow had kept him in check, so to speak, where the focus was him elevating himself. And then, his brand got big. And with his brand became his ego. And with his ego, came all of these other things. And it's just things that had nothing to do with, who he was and what he was exhibiting as a basketball player. And that stuff is completely overshadowed. Forget all of that. Because if you look at the way that the roster is constructed, Ja Morant is not elevating those guys to a point. It's like starting from scratch. And unfortunately, that roster is there's no Desmond Bane there. There's no Triple J there. There's no Dylan Brooks there. They're different aspects. They're different type of players. And that just means you have to be available. And listen, one thing too as well, Shaw, Ja Morant has been injured way too many times too, bro. Let's not act like, that's not also playing a significant factor. He's not had a major injury that's made him gone for the year. That's just, off the court antics. But he's had numerous injuries through the course of his career already that has sidelined him, because there have been numerous stints where he's like, hey, the Grizzlies, can they win not having Ja Morant on the court? And they go out and they have, like a plus, plus minus 35 when he's not on the basketball court, but yet they still need him, right? We're not talking about those same circumstances. So I just feel like, for the Grizzlies, they needed to have done something with regards to Ja Morant, right? Now, this is going to be making us question what the purpose is, because it's not so much as Ja Morant, it's just really is the Grizzlies. No matter what they do, it's too late for us to feel with confidence that it's going to allow them to rebound and put together a roster that's going to compete with the likes of what we already got in the Western Conference to even be in play-in conversations. So we'll talk more about the Grizzlies and autopsy, but they have not lent themselves when the opportunity presented itself for them to start making those steps, making those moves, to do something with Ja. They haven't done it, and I think it's now extended more the confidence of us feeling like, yo, they're not going to be in the play-in at all come next year because of it.
Yeah, for sure. Without looking, I looked, so I'm asking the question. Over, under on number of games John Morant has played this year. So I'm going to give you, is it over 30 or under 30?
Under 30.
Yeah, it's 20.
Yeah.
20 games.
You can't, there's no way as a superstar player that a team is going to be winning or having in any kind of decent winning percentage with that many games your star player is not on the court. That's just
it's absurd. It's absurd.
Crazy.
He's played what is this? 79 games in the last 3 seasons.
Yeah.
So
it's not gonna cut it, bro. Awesome show. Woo! I can't wait, man. Never has being dead been more alive. getting into death has been more fulfilling, life fulfilling.
Wow. We're seeing if some of these teams
the dead. I love it.
We're seeing if these teams have proof of life, right? And each season is an opportunity to resurrect yourself, right? And have an opportunity to show, hey, you know what? We're out here. We're ready. We really can do this thing. And only a handful of teams we mentioned actually have that opportunity, to be honest with you. I think we're going to see some people walking like the Walking Dead for a good majority of next year. And while we don't wish that upon anybody, it's just reality that I think some of these teams are faced with based on how their rosters currently constructed, the injury concerns that they have, and other teams that are just flat out better than them currently.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. We like to get your guys' thoughts, man. What do you think, the teams that we were talking about, what their chances are in possibly making the play-in or even making the playoffs? So we'd be really curious to get where you guys are coming from about how much confidence you have on those teams. And again, man, we appreciate everybody for hopping on board with us for the baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do. And we'll catch up with you next time.